Greetings and salutations to all you folks out there. It is time for another entry into the tutorial series. We're going to be covering Tech 3 air units today. Once again, as I've warned you on all these casts, it's going to be a lot of numbers, statistics, and a very detailed look at comparisons between the factions' air units. There's not going to be any talks of specific strategies of use. That will be coming in the next episode. Yes, it has been promised a long time, but I am finally covering the final group of units before I start on the strategy series. I will be covering Tech 4 and Navy in a couple of later episodes in this tutorial, but for now we're just going to cover air, and then we're going to cover some of the strategy. So without further ado, I'm going to jump straight into this. You have been warned, there's going to be a lot of numbers, there's going to be a little bit of dry material, but hopefully it will be helpful to anyone who is not incredibly familiar with the intricate workings of the Forged Alliance game. Alright, let me get my papers in order and we will dive in. First up, just going to check in with the Tech 1 Air Scouts. Now, these are probably the most uninteresting in stats, but these are the units that are the most underused of any unit in the game, and they should be used most. These are vital for intel. They all cost 40 mass and 420 energy. Now that is a bit of cost, and they do build very quickly at -5 in the factories. But these little guys are very speedy. They have a large vision radius and they have radar. You're going to want to use these to scout out your opponents at every opportunity you get. They are very fast, traveling at 20 speed. They outrun anything in Tech 1 or Tech 2. And like I said, they are basically your flying eyes. They all have slight variations in health from 25 to 35 health, and some other fairly insignificant swaps in stats, but generally they're all the same. Alright, moving right along to the interceptors. These are the building blocks of any air force. All four factions have them, and once again, they all cost the same. They just have very slight variations in how their stats play out. Alright, let's start with the cost. They're all 50 mass and they are all 2,250 energy. Air, you will find, is always more power intensive than land and generally costs slightly less mass. So you will need extra P-gens to handle your Air Force. Running right on down the list, the Aeon fighter has 285 health versus 280 for Cybern, 295 for UEF, and 290 for Seraphim. So there's only about 15 total health difference, as you will see is going to develop a pattern. UEF has the highest health, but there's also slight variations in the damage. Aeon and Cybern have two guns at 24 damage apiece, totaling out to 48 damage. Seraphim has 51 damage, and UEF has 50. But realistically speaking, the engagement and the skill of the player is far more vital than the actual stats of these guys. The stat changes are pretty insignificant. An interceptor is an interceptor unless you really want to get into the detailed, intricate workings of a 1 versus 1 scenario where they're all on patrol. It's not worth it. All right. Moving right along to the Tech 1 bombers, where we will first see a little bit of variety. Let me get my page turned around so I have the correct set of statistics, and we'll dive into them. All right. They all have the same cost. They are 80 mass apiece and 2,250 power apiece. Health ranges from 200 as the lowest on Cybern, and the highest is, you guessed it, UEF at 215. So once again, we have about 15 health variation on those. They all have the same flight speed, maxing out at, and I had the number here and it escaped me. Actually, max speed is a bull number on here. It does not say. All right. But they all have the same traveling speed. That is unimportant. However, they do vary wildly on the actual implementation of their bomb. And I'm just going to go ahead and place an attack move order over here, and we will see how they behave. Let's start with the Aeon. Aeon is right here. It has the lowest damage at 150, or at 50 damage per second, 150 damage, or 200 damage per bomb. I'm sorry. I will get my numbers in order. 200 damage per bomb dropped. Now, the difference on this one is that it does have a stun effect. So the lower damage is made up for by the stun. Next up, let us look at the Seraphim. The Seraphim drops a single bomb with a fairly large area of effect. It has a 4 damage radius. Actually, the Aeon has a 4 as well. It does do more damage, though. It does 250 damage per drop without the stun effect. This one is very maneuverable and is a favorite of people who like to micro their bombers. Alright, next up we're going to look at Cybrin. Cybrin has 50 damage per projectile, but that is actually slightly misleading because it does have 6 projectiles in a bunch in a spread pattern, and I'm going to actually move the move order so that you can see how this works out. You can see it drops 6 projectiles, does a total of 300 damage, 6 times 50 damage, and it does a very nice spread attack. It is excellent for killing off groups of units, and if you line up the direction that the bomber is traveling, you can use it to kill a row of power generators instead of just 1 or 2 at a time with the area of effect like these 2 bombers. And finally, let's look at the UEF bomber. Here it comes right here. This is the Napalm bomber. You'll notice it drops 4 projectiles. Those technically have an area of effect of 3, but they have an extended burn time. It is 160 damage total, but it's got kind of an odd damaging scheme. Sometimes it does quite a bit of damage. Sometimes if your units are moving out of the fire and not into it, it won't do as much. It's an oddball. It is very good at carpet bombing units, similar to the Cybrin bomber. That is the best thing you can know for it, and it does do well, again, at attacking lines of power generators. There will be a lot more on Tech 1 bombers in the strategy videos because there's a lot that you can do to use them, but that is the overview of their statistics. Alright, lastly, on the Tech 1 scale are the transports. Now, these guys are something else that you really want to use a lot. People underestimate the power of drops and also the power of expansion on maps that are a little larger. Put a couple engineers in one of these guys, fly it across the map, you save a ton of time for a relatively low cost, and as long as you can protect it, you can drop all sorts of things. These guys are amazing. Alright, they are all the same mass cost and power cost. 120 mass, 4800 power. They all have the same speed, maxing out at 10, and that means that pretty much anything in the air can chase them down and kill them. And they all have 500 health. Now, these 3 up here, Cybrin, UEF, and Aeon, are pretty much exactly the same other than appearance. They all carry 6 Tech 1 units or 3 Tech 2 units, and they all have pretty much the same characteristics. The one that is different is the Seraphim transport. It has 8 hooks, so it can carry 8 units or 8 Tech 1 units or 4 Tech 2 units. So this one is going to give the Seraphim a little bit of an edge in the dropping game. Alright, that is a wrap of the Tech 1. Let's go ahead and dive straight into Tech 2. Alright, this is the fighter bomber section. Now, this is something that is misunderstood by a lot of players. And it is a lack of information, not a lack of player skill, so nobody take offense at what I'm about to say. Tech 2 air, unless your Aeon, is not for air superiority at all. They all lose to interceptors. Hands down, no contest, you will not win an air fight with fighter bombers. Okay, I've got that out of the way. Now let's jump into statistics. UEF, Seraphim, and Cybern have a combination fighter bomber. They all cost the same, 420 mass, 8,400 power. You'll notice the power requirement is going up substantially as the tier rises. These guys are not helpless against air, but they are much lower in damage potential per mass than interceptors, and they have the same flight speeds and roughly the same characteristics as interceptors. All of the extra cost is going towards the bombing capability. We'll start with the Janus, that is the UEF. I'm going to go ahead and set in a firing pattern here so you can see it. It is a napalm thrower, just like the Tech 1 bomber. You can see the brilliant area of effect there. It is nearly impossible for an ACU to dodge. It does huge amounts of blanket damage to units or bases. The disadvantage is that it does not do a whole lot of concentrated damage on one location. The carpet bomb is 60 damage per second, and it fires 8 projectiles and has a 10-second reload time, yada yada yada. The interesting thing that I'm looking for is the total damage. 600 accumulated damage over the area of effect between all projectiles. So 600 is the number that I'm looking for. It has a double linked railgun for the anti-air capabilities. It does 150 DPS anti-air. And that sounds like a lot, but when you compare it to interceptors, let me go ahead and pull my sheet over here. Interceptors are doing about 50 damage per second for 50 mass. So if you spend 420 mass on interceptors, you're getting well over 400 damage per second for that mass investment. Whereas if you're looking at a fighter bomber, the Janus or the Natha, the Seraphim one, you're only getting 150. So you can see the massive disadvantage there. And then also the Janus has 1200 HP and the Natha has 1175 HP, which is less HP than the accumulated mass in interceptors. So these guys will never ever win an air fight. They can participate in an air fight. They make a good last resort if you need to deny air and you have nothing else, but do not rely on these for air cover. Let's look at this. The Natha, the Seraphim version, like I said, it has a double 75 damage gun, so total of 150 damage per second. It has a single large projectile that does 1,175 damage, very large amount of damage with a good area of effect of 3. So this guy is brute force on a single target. They're excellent for unsuspected ACU snipes, but they are easily dodged with the small area of effect with just a little bit of micro. So you don't want to rely on them too much unless you have the element of surprise. These guys do very good damage to single stationary targets. So that is the Natha. Now let's jump over here to the Cybern. That is the Corsair, the one that everybody loves. It has 1100 health. And it has a nanite missile system for the anti-air capabilities that clocks in at a measly 54 damage per second. This guy is absolutely horrific at anti-air. It has a third the damage of these guys, which already have much less damage potential than interceptors. So this guy is just short of helpless as far as anti-air goes. However, it makes up for that with a blistering 1,200 damage per second on its air-to-ground missiles, which it fires at very odd angles. You can pretty much attack right next to the bomber, just like that. As long as your loading bar is full, you can pretty much fire almost directly underneath the thing. It is a missile, not a bomb. And the other thing about it is the firing cycle is so fast and the projectile speed is so much harder that these guys are almost impossible to dodge. You can dodge some of the projectiles, you will never dodge all of them. So these guys are the king of the Tech 2 snipers when it comes to ACU killing. 1200 damage potential with that nasty firing pattern. These guys are very good at taking out targets. So that's going to wrap up the fighter bombers. Next up we have the Swiftwind. Now this is the Aeon Tech 2 combat fighter. This guy, Aeon does not have a bomber at the Tech 2 level, but it does have the ultimate air denial tool. The Swiftwind has a top speed of 18, which means that it can chase down Tech 2 transports and strap bombers. Interceptors have the same airspeed as Tech 2 transports and strap bombers. That means that if you select interceptors and click attack on a transport, it will never actually hit the transport unless it's a direct head-on interception, because the interceptors track to fall in behind the strap bombers or transports. So once they complete the turn and accelerate, the Tech 2 transport or strap bomber is out of range. And the interceptor, because it has the same flight speed, will never catch up to the transport until the transport stops. Meet the Swiftwind, it can easily deny both and even stands a chance mass for mass against ASF. This little guy is truly the king of the skies in the Tech 2 phase. It costs 200 mass, half as much as a fighter bomber, and 6,000 power, quite a bit less than these guys, and it packs in the same 150 damage per second. So it is actually roughly damage equivalent to an interceptor, but it is faster and more maneuverable. It has about 800 health, 800 health, which totals out to 1600 health. So it actually has a higher health stat mass for mass as the fighter bombers. So this guy is a very handy tool. It's sometimes sad that Aeon does not have a bomber at the Tech 2 phase, but this guy more than makes up for it. All right, gunships. Every faction has a gunship, and a couple of them have very interesting characteristics. We'll start with the Aeon. The Aeon has a very solid gunship, I think kind of making up for the fact that it doesn't have a bomber. It has 848 health. Well, let me list this off first. All of the gunships have the same costs. Again, you'll notice that that is kind of a standard rule for the for the air units. They're pretty well balanced between the factions. 300 mass, 240 mass, 4800 power. So that is the same for these guys. 65 damage per second for the Spectre and 848 health. They all also have the same range, the same speed, the same fuel, all of that. So that one is a standard gunship, and then the Seraphim gunship is also standard. Sorry for the little bit of a ramble here, guys. I'm having trouble reading these numbers out. The Seraphim gunship has a total of 60 damage per second and 864 health. And then the UEF and the Cybern gunships each have a little bit of a special ability. Now the UEF gunship packs in 66 damage per second and has 880 health, but it also has a docking clamp. Now, I'm not sure how many of you knew this. This is kind of something that is fairly well known, but at the same time, there's people who didn't know about it, and they're like, oh my goodness, you can carry units with the UEF gunship. Yes, you can, and it is amazing. I like to carry flak, because if you carry flak, you can actually drop it off underneath the gunship and provide your own anti-air support. The Renegade can carry one Tech 2 or one Tech 1 unit. It cannot carry two Tech 1s, and it cannot carry a Tech 3. But this guy can pack in a tank, it can pack in anti-air units, whatever you want to carry with it. It is a very, very handy mechanism. So that is the special ability of the UEF transport right there. Pretty cool stuff. The Cybern gunship differs in that it has area of effect. Now you would say, well, what good is area of effect? The damage number is good. It still has 60 damage per second, similar to the rest of these guys, and it has 832 health, by far the least health, which is kind of common among the Cybern units. But the area of effect covers, where is it? 3 area of effect. So what that does is, if you run in for a raid, you can raid engineers, build power of the enemy, and instead of attacking one engineer at a time like all these guys do, if you target a clump of units, it's going to destroy the entire clump. So even though it's only 60 damage per second like the other gunships, if you're hitting 4 units at a time, it's effectively doing 2,400 damage per second because of the area of effect. And it is the only gunship that does that. So that's a pretty brutal tool to use. Cybern rating at the max definitely can inflict tons of damage with that. Alright, let's go ahead and move on to the torpedo bombers. Now, once again, these guys have pretty big similarities, but there are 1 or 2 differences that I am going to point out as soon as I get my sheet flipped over to the right spot. You'll notice a theme with that. I have trouble getting organized sometimes, but it is okay. Alright, here's the torpedo bombers. These guys, again, all the same cost. 240 mass, 4,800 power across the board. Slight variations in health, from the lowest as 800 HP for the Cybern, and the highest is 860 HP for the UEF. They also have similar damage statistics. It is, well, the same damage statistics. It is 60 across the board. The differences are in the firing cycles. Now, the Cybern, UEF, and Aeon are pretty much the same. I mean, there's not really significant differences in them. They all hone in on a naval target. They drop their torpedo. It hits the target, and the target explodes. And you'll see right there, actually I did not see which one of those had the longer angle of attack. One of them drops the torpedo sooner, but they all hit the water at the same spot. Here, we'll see it there. UEF drops its the soonest, but it does not hit the water until later, just like the other unit. So you can practically drop these guys on top of whatever naval unit you want. Doesn't make any difference whether it's on the shore line or not, and it will hit the target. Seraphim, on the other hand, is the booger. It does not work very well at all, and I can say that objectively, because since these guys drop on top of their targets, it doesn't really make any difference where the unit is. The torpedo is going to hit anyway, and torpedo defense doesn't really do you any good because the torp is practically dropped on top of the unit. Now what you can see here is that the Seraphim unit drops 2 torpedoes well back from the target, which split into 3 and then go for the kill. Now the problem with that is that since it's dropping away from the target, if your unit is on the shoreline and the Seraphim bomber is coming from the shore, it cannot hit the target. And then secondly, because the torpedo travels in the water, it's very prone to, if you're in shallow water like this, the torpedo may hit ripples in the bottom. And if you're out in the open water, the torpedo defense on whatever unit you're aiming at has a chance to kick in. So the Seraphim torpedo bomber is definitely not anywhere close to as useful as these guys, but it does still do its job of attacking water units. Whether or not that will be addressed in a later balance patch, I do not know, but as of this time, Seraphim torp bomber is objectively worse than the other 3. Alright, let's jump into the Tech 2 transports. Now these guys actually vary quite a bit. And again, let me find my sheet because Tech 2 transports are somewhere. That is the Tech 1 transports. There they are. Tech 2 transports. That is what I need. Alright. They all cost the same. Again, 300 mass, 12,000 power. These are actually fairly pricey. The Seraphim transport, again, carries tons of units. I'm trying to see if there is a hook count on the unit database page, but I do not see one, which is kind of sad because I would like to know the exact number. Seraphim and UEF carry more than the Aeon and the Cybran do. Cybran carries 4 Tech 2 units, I think. Yes, as well as the Aeon, if I'm not totally mistaken. It may be 6. And then, of course, they have double the capacity for Tech 1 units. UEF, on the other hand, it carries 6 Tech 2 units. 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. I believe that's correct. And then the that was UEF. And then the Seraphim carries 8 Tech 2 units, and then a freaking monstrous load of Tech 1. This is the infamous Zooey drop. Tech 2 transports do have a higher speed, higher health statistics, anywhere between 1525 and 1675 health. And between the higher speed and the higher survivability, these guys are very good at penetrating air defenses to drop units. Zooey drop for this one, and then the UEF Tech 2 transport is widely regarded as the best Tech 2 transport because of its high health and the fact that UEF has the strongest anti-air on their transport. It's 2 guns totaling out to 48 damage per second, as well as a 20 damage per second ground weapon. This guy is actually really good at killing off interceptors that are trying to kill it. If you send 1 or 2 interceptors after a UEF transport, the UEF transport will not only survive, it will kill both interceptors. So this is a very, very handy transport here. Seraphim transport also has a strong air presence. It has 40 damage per second, and then it has a 6.6 damage per second ground weapon. Aeon does not have a ground weapon, but it does have 4 guns at 7 damage each for a total of 28 damage per second to air, which is pretty bad. And then the Cybran transport is opposite. It does not... I'm sorry, it does have anti-air, my bad. It has 40 damage per second anti-air, same as Seraphim, but it also has 13 damage per second on its ground weapon. However, the Cybran does have an interesting ability. The Cybran transport has stun on its ground weapon. It can stun units. So if you send in a T2 drop with Cybran, you will want to hover around with the T2 transport firing on targets. Not only will it be intel for the units that are already on the ground, but you can stun a unit or 2 with the ground firing gun. Now, I cannot remember. I believe I did look at not transports, ghetto gunships in the Tech 1 land phase, but I'm going to brush over it here again. If you load light assault bots, that would be the Flare, the Hunter, or the Mech Marine. Seraphim does not have this ability. Into a Tech 1 or Tech 2 transports, the Mech Marines can fire at the ground. In Tech 1 transports, that basically means that you have to just kind of hover over the area that you want to hit and hope that your labs hit the target that you want them to hit. Usually they prioritize engineers over buildings and combat units over engineers, so that's usually not a big deal. Tech 2, however, is very handy because you have a ground firing weapon. You can place a target and the transport will fire at it. And what's awesome about that is the light assault bots in the transport will assist the ground weapon. So if you have a target picked out, all of the labs will fire at the same thing that the transport's firing at. That means you can focus your damage a lot better. UEF transport with the combined anti-air abilities, high health, and the high unit capacity makes the best ghetto gunship in the game. It has the highest ground damage, the amazing Mech Marines, which have the highest combined damage once they're inside the transport. and generally it's not a good thing to see coming at your ACU. Best defense against that is flak, because flak is the transport's weakness. It will destroy all of the units on the transport, even if it doesn't kill the transport itself, because the flak fires at the bottom. All right, enough of that. I think that is all of the Tech 1 and Tech 2 units. Ignore the special units. I will be coming back to those. You know what? We will just go ahead and do them. All right, these are the oddball units. I'm sure that you all are very familiar with these. This is the UEF Tech 3 Heavy Transport. This is a very interesting beast. It has a overshield, which it is the only transport that has that. The shield has 3,000 HP, and the transport has 4,500 HP. This is a freaking monstrous meat shield. Also, as of the next patch, the shield will actually prevent flak from hitting the units inside the transport, and it does a pretty good job. Well, it completely protects the transport's contents from Tech 1 anti-air, although SAMs and flaks will get through if the transport is flying forwards. The Continental has 2 ground firing guns totaling out to 60 damage per second, and 4 anti-air guns totaling out to 240 damage per second on a fairly significant 50 range. This guy is actually a halfway decent gunship. It's debatable, but it kind of sort of acts like a restorer. Low but respectable ground damage and very high air damage. You can stack a bunch of these up and they actually make a fairly useful air ambush tool. They're not as good as they used to be, though. They used to be significantly overpowered. They now cost far more energy to run and build than a restorer, so you cannot effectively match the restorer's capability. And then the other thing is that the overlapping shields on the Continental now do not have a significant effect on protecting the whole group. Used to be you could stack these. You could get 50 of them in one location, all protected by each other's shield bubbles, and then you would have the full damage capacity of the group until the last shield bubble collapsed. So you could effectively collect 100,000 health in one spot that packed in thousands upon thousands of air damage, and it was just a nasty situation. But that has been nerfed. It is still fairly strong and can definitely protect itself, but you cannot use it as an invincible anti-air tool. Alright, and that does have an impressive amount of hooks. I think it can carry 28 Mech Marines or something like that, 26. Or it can carry 6 Tech 3 units, which is by far the heaviest carrier of any of these guys. It is 1 Tech 3 to each of these, and then 2 Tech 3s to these 2, I think 3 to this one, and 4 to that one, or something like that. It might be 3 to this one as well. No, it is 4. I've seen them carrying 4. All right. Jester. That is the much-loved Cybern Tech 1 gunship. This little guy costs an inordinate amount compared to the other Tech 1 air units. A whopping 200 mass, basically quadruple the cost of any other Tech 1 land unit or air unit, and 5,000 energy. In trade for that, you have a gunship that is roughly mass equivalent to a Tech 2 gunship, but without the area of effect that the Renegade has, and without the long flight time. It only has 5 minutes of flight time. So this guy is an excellent early game harassment tool, but I would only build maybe 5 of these. If you're planning on building more than 6 or 7 Jesters, you are actually better off getting the Tech 2 Air Factory upgrade and going ahead and building Renegades, because you do gain a fairly significant amount in your health stat, and then also you get the longer flight time and the area of effect with the Renegade. So early harassment or snipe tool, definitely a go, but if you're going to do any heavy attacking or anything like that, don't build 30 Jesters, build a Tech 2 Air Factory and make 20 renegades. Finally, we have the Mercy. This is the bane of the team game's existence. You do not want these coming up on you. They have a very short fuel gauge. Total flight time, let me see, is 1 minute and 50 seconds, which I actually thought it was shorter than that. But it's right, 1 minute 19 of fuel down there in the bottom left. These guys have a whopping, wait for it, 10 HP. One shot from anything will kill them. So you might ask what use they are. Well, if you can manage to sneak one in, they do a murderous 2,400 damage in a kamikaze shot. These guys are horrendous. And you'll see here if it will ground fire. I think these do ground fire. It will circle back in, build up to attack speed. It will go poof. And there's the seeking projectiles that zoom in, have a very high area of effect, damage radius of 3, and 2,400 damage. So that is a very, very dangerous snipe tool. However, anything can kill it. So it's kind of a cheese weapon. If you deny it, you deny it. If you don't, you die. All right, let's jump into Tech 3 Air and cover it very quickly before this video gets so long that no one ever watches the entire thing. Jumping in with the Tech 3 Air Scouts. Once again, these guys all cost the same and they have roughly the same statistics. They are all 195 mass, 7,500 power, and they all have about 1,100 health, except for the Siren Scout, which has 700 health for some unknown reason, because they all do essentially the same thing for the same cost. The Aeon Scout is the oddball out. It does have Omni, but does not have sonar. The other three have Omni and sonar, so you can see under the water with these. I don't know why Aeon doesn't, but apparently Aeon had to have a weakness somewhere, and they decided that not having sonar on the T3 spy plane was the way to go on that. These guys are very fast, the fastest unit in the game. They have an airspeed of 30, and they have a very large vision radius with the accompanying radar. So these guys are your eyes and ears into what the enemy is doing. Let's jump into the ASF. These are the king of the skies. These are the guys that any game, pretty much any game over 20 minutes, you will see ASF in team games, and then any game over 30 minutes in 1 versus 1, you will have these on the field. You use these to control your airspace. They are fast, they are powerful, and they can take down just about anything in the sky. They all cost 350 mass and 40,000 power. They all have about 1,800 health, except for Cybern, which has 1,725. You can see the pattern here. They all have roughly the same damage. The Aeon and Seraphim have 405 damage per second, and then the Cybern and UEF have 200 damage weapons, totaling out to 400. So really effectively no difference. They all have a flight speed of 25, so they can chase down anything except a Tech 3 Air Scout. The oddball out is the Cybern ASF. These other three are virtually identical. You will talk to people who will argue about the merits of one over the other. I would have to lean towards probably the UEF as my personal favorite, but for all intents and purposes, they are completely the same. Don't listen to anyone who tells you to choose one faction over the other because of their ASF. The first turn and your skill as a player makes infinitely more difference than the actual ASF does itself, and you can't blame a loss on the behavior of the ASF. You are the one steering. The exception to that rule is the Seraphim ASF, which is inherently better and worse than the other factions. It is better because it has stealth and tracking projectiles, which are very efficient at killing off single targets. So this guy is one where if you don't have Omni coverage, you can engage the stealth. You can circle around any which way you very well please and use that to get the upper hand on the first engagement, that ever so critical first turn in an ASF battle. And you can also use them to mop up units on the outskirts of the map and incoming snipes without drawing the attention of the main force of the other team. The disadvantages: low health. It will lose out straight up in a microed one-on-one battle with equal numbers. The other disadvantage, and the main reason that it does not perform as well, is because it wastes between it wastes about 1/3 of its damage in an ASF fight, because these guys have very fast moving projectiles. The Cybern ASF, on the other hand, has the long trailing fire at the same speed as the plane is flying and then accelerate into the other aircraft style projectiles. I will see if I can ground fire them here and get an idea of what they look like. It's not wanting to fire. Oh well. You've all seen them in game, so I'm not going to go to the trouble of doing that. Because of the slow projectile speed, it overkills. It will fire more projectiles than are actually needed to kill the target. Therefore, any projectiles launched after the target will be dead are wasted damage per second, and that could be anywhere from 1/4 to 1/3 of the total damage per second, depending on what you're doing at the moment. These ASF pretty much use their entire effective damage against the enemy forces. So you can see why in a well microed engagement, the Cybern is at a distinct disadvantage. But when you factor in the stealth and the ability to move around the map without attracting the attention of the enemy ASF, you can see the strength of the Cybern one. The only other thing I will say on that is that with the stealth and the tracking projectiles and how the Cybern ASF operates, if you take an equal number of ASF and attack order them into each other, the Cybern ASF will actually win, both in small numbers and in equal numbered engagements of unmicroed ASF, because these guys seek and destroy with incredible efficiency. However, when you start microing them, one bad turn, you get slaughtered, and even when you're behind the other player, they don't kill ASF as efficiently. So small engagements, stealthy operations, Cybern wins. Large scale scene engagements, the other three factions win. So pretty much by the Cybern's normal modus operandi. Let's move on to the strap bombers. These are very, very different from each other, even though they are apparently the same at first glance. Let's go ahead and run over the statistics, and then I will talk about them in more detail. They all cost 2,100 mass. They all cost 105,000 power. They are expensive son of a guns. And the Aeon, Seraphim, and UEF bombers are very, very similar, with slight differences in actual damage output and area of effect. They all have between 37 and 4,000 health. 3,700 and 4,000 health, my bad. The Aeon bomber has the highest damage and the lowest area of effect. Area of effect is 4. Damage is 3,450. This is the most easily dodged strap bomber. Seraphim has 5 area of effect and 3,250 damage. So 200 less damage, 1 more area of effect. UEF has 6 area of effect and a total damage output of 3,000. So again, 200 less damage, 1 more area of effect. You can see the pattern arising. All 3 of these guys can kill a Tech 2 mass extractor and all 4 mass storages in 1 hit. So these guys are fantastic eco raiders and pack a punch for taking out solitary targets. The Cybern bomber has stealth. This guy is a sneaky bastard, and it will stab anyone in the back at any opportunity. This thing is nasty. It has the ability to completely evade detection until you have either line of sight or omni, and then it lays down over a tremendous 7 area of effect, pushing 2,750 damage, which is less than these other bombers, but far more than sufficient to kill off any single target with just a handful of strat bombers. The only disadvantage to the Cybern Strat Bomber is that it cannot kill a Tech 2 mass extractor in one pass. It will kill the mass storages, but it needs 2 passes or cleanup from a Tech 2 bomber or another Strat Bomber to kill the mass extractor. So that kind of sucks. You can't really use it as effectively for eco rating, but it is a royal pain in the butt to deal with as far as snipes go. All right, Tech 3 gunships. This is one area where the Seraphim lack. They do not have a gunship, but the other 3 factions do, and they are interesting peoples. Let me find my sheet on them, and we will jump into them. First up is the Cybern Whaler. This guy has radar jammer. That means it generates false blips, which you may say, what is the use of that? Well, you can have 3 of them and it looks like 50 on the radar, so you can spoof people and spook people into doing what you want them to do, or just give them a heart attack, whatever suits your fancy. And also, if they have radar coverage but have not scouted the actual whaler, when the ASF or SAMs engage the gunships for the first time, they're going to waste their first and possibly second volleys on the false radar blips. So that does actually come in handy and enhances the survival of the whaler. These 3 gunships all cost the same amount. No, they do not. Don't listen to me. The UEF and the Cybern gunships cost the same. 1,260 mass a piece, and the energy cost is 42,000. So those guys are virtually identical. The UEF gunship does 225 damage, and the Whaler does 233 damage. UEF has slightly more health, Cybern slightly less health. So these guys are roughly equivalent to each other. And let me double check, neither of these guys have any area of effect. It is single target only, so my observation about the Renegade being the only gunship with area of effect is correct. These guys both have really plinky P cannons to shoot the enemy air with. The Whaler has 18 damage per second, oh so scary, on its anti-air cannon, and the broadsword has 12 damage per second, so practically useless, but they do exist. Alright, so these guys are long lost twins of each other, whereas the Aeon Restorer is very different, and I'm going to spend the rest of this video talking about him because he is ridiculous. Actually, I do not have one spawned on the map. Let me spawn one very quickly so we can talk about this unit real quick, and I will get it out of the way. Tech 3 Air and Torpedo Bomber. Aeon has a special unit that I should have talked about just a second ago. It has the Solus. This is a very handy tool in the hands of the Aeon. It does 4,000 damage per pass to Navy, and the unit database lies to you. It says that it does 2,000 damage, but that is because it measures the damage of the projectiles that are initially dropped out of the Solus. And you will see here, it drops 4 singles, which then split into 2 torpedoes apiece. So that doubles the damage. It is 4,000 damage. They can kill a cruiser of any faction or a Tech 3 sub-hunter in one pass. So these guys make awesome suicide runs. They cost 2/3 the mass of a cruiser and kill a cruiser. So you will win mass for mass versus Navy with Tech 3 torp bombers. That is a very incredibly powerful tool in the hands of the Aeon. And at the moment, I do not have the cost on me for that unit, but I don't think it really matters at this point, unless I can find it very quickly. There it is, right there. It is 1,650 mass and 55,000 power. and it has a whopping 3,750 health. So there are your statistics on the Solus. All right. Now, returning to the object of many a grief and a complaint and a lot of misunderstanding, the Restorer. The Restorer is an anti-air gunship. It is specifically called an anti-air gunship. It costs slightly slightly less mass than the other two gunships. It costs 1,200 mass as opposed to 1,260, but it costs significantly more power at 64,000 to 4,200 for the other two factions. All right, let's talk about this just a little bit because it bears grinding into a paste and beating the dead horse and whatever else you refer to overworn arguments as. The ground fire does 120 damage per second, which you can compare to the 233 and 225 of the other two gunships and realize that the Restorer is about half as powerful as the other gunships. It is not spectacular for attacking ground, but it is solid. The other thing is that it does 140 air damage on 60 range, which you will realize takes it up to just over the damage total of the other two gunships. It just splits them between ground and air. Instead of having a practically useless air cannon, it has a very good one. Now, this unit was incredibly overpowered in earlier versions of the game. I will not deny you that. This was a strong, very broken unit as far as balance goes. But it has been nerfed to where it holds a good place in the game, the proper place that it should have, and you should not be totally terrified of it. The Restorer is roughly the same cost as 3 ASF. 3 ASF of any faction will kill a Restorer. And the more ASF you have to Restorers, if you have 10 Restorers and 30 ASF, or if you have 100 Restorers and 300 ASF, the more ASF there are, the more they win over the Restorers, the more you'll have left over. So the whole Restorers are overpowered and they beat air superiority fighters is completely false. They do beat ASF 1 versus 1. They beat them hard, but it's because they cost 3 times as much. So if you have that magic number, 3-to-1 ratio, the ASF will win versus the Restorers. The other thing that you need to pay attention to is that when you dive into a blob of Restorers, you need to actually micro and not just fly past. If you target it, they make these huge swooping turns. You need to stay close within your firing range so that you're dumping as much damage as you possibly can into the groups of Restorers without having huge wasted swaths, because you can see the Restorers range and the ASF range. If you're going way out there to make a turn, then you're getting hammered while you can't fire back. So those are the two things that I will say about the Restorers, countering the Restorer, because people need to hear that. There's way too many people that still think the Restorer is broken balance, when in fact it fits perfectly into its place. It can defend itself very well against air, but it sacrifices ground damage to do it. And if you have a player that's focused on air that builds 100% ASF, mass for mass, you will win versus the Restorer. So that's exactly how it should be. The other thing I will say is that these guys lose incredibly hard to flak. If you see the enemy player building gunships, build mobile flak. That is all I've got to say. Mobile flak will murder gunships for about 1/3 of the mass investment, and that is being generous. You will absolutely melt the face off of a group of intruding gunships for 1/3 the mass of flak. Alrighty, that covers all of the Tech 1, Tech 2, and Tech 3 air units. That is a very long video with a ton of numbers, but hopefully you learned something from it. And I don't know when the next tutorial video will be out, but when it comes out, I will be covering initial builds and early land engagements, mostly in the 5x5 scenario. So Tune in for the next tutorial series if you want to start learning about the strategies of using all of these great units. And until then, I will see you next time.